Welcome to Reformed Thinking. This is the deep dive, and today we are cutting straight through the noise to get to the core arguments of one of Christian history's most influential thinkers, C.S. Lewis.
Hmm.
We've been supplied with a substantial stack of material centered on two giant defining topics: the existence of evil and the startling identity claims of Jesus Christ.
It is indeed an ambitious deep dive, and Lewis is a wonderful guide for this. He takes issues that most people simply let stand as unresolvable paradoxes and attempts to bring rational clarity to them.
Right.
His strength lies in his logical, almost clinical approach to Christian belief. Our mission is to extract not just his conclusions, but his entire logical progression step by step.
Yeah, that's it.
We are seeking specific insight into immense theological puzzles. If God is perfectly good and sovereign, how can evil be permitted to operate? What is the genuine cost of granting free will? And, moving from cosmology to Christology, what exactly did Christ claim for himself, and why does Lewis argue that we can't simply admire him while dismissing those claims?
That's right. Our goal today is to give you, the learner, a clear way into Lewis's mind, a map for understanding his logical steps as he confronts these alternatives. The material reveals a structure that is surprisingly tight and incredibly logical, and we want to ensure we take the time to unpack every stage of his argument.
It's easy to miss things.
It is. If we move too quickly, we risk missing the subtle but crucial distinctions he makes. So let's start exactly where Lewis does, with the central conflict that defines the Christian view of the universe. The premise is that Christians believe that an evil authority has somehow seized control and made himself the prince of this world.
Right.
This isn't a small philosophical point, it's a high-stakes logical trap because it forces us to confront the nature of divine control and sovereignty.
The trap, as Lewis sees it, is immediate and severe. If we state that the current state of war, this pervasive presence of the dark power, the suffering, the rebellion, is somehow according to God's will, then, well, the implication is that God sanctions or even prefers evil.
Which makes him seem strained or malevolent.
Exactly. That's the first horn of the dilemma, and it's unacceptable to the Orthodox Christian position.
Conversely, if we argue that this state of affairs, this rebellion, this pervasive evil is contrary to his will, then we have a huge theological problem.
A massive one.
How can anything happen against the specific desire of a being who possesses absolute total authority? If God is truly sovereign, how can he be successfully defied in such a dramatic, long-lasting way?
Yeah.
The very idea of the Almighty being thwarted seems to undermine the concept of almightiness.
And this is where Lewis shows his skill as a philosophical guide. He addresses this apparent contradiction by introducing a key distinction, one that allows us to resolve the paradox without compromising either God's absolute authority or his perfect goodness.
And he does this with an analogy.
He does. He uses a practical relational analogy, the analogy of a person in authority.
And the analogy he settles on is the mother in the schoolroom, which is brilliant because anyone who has ever supervised or managed others immediately recognizes the dynamic. It allows Lewis to distinguish between two types of will operating simultaneously: the long-term structural will and the immediate specific will.
Let's unpack that. Think about this mother. Her desire, her specific will, is for a tidy schoolroom and obedient children.
Of course.
She prefers order, respect, and cleanliness.
Yeah.
But she has a prior structural will that transcends the immediate outcome.
Okay.
She wills her children to develop self-control, discipline, and moral character. To achieve that greater good, she must deliberately decide, I am going to grant them genuine autonomy and agency. I will not constantly police their actions. They need to learn to keep it tidy themselves.
That structural will, the will to grant genuine freedom and autonomy for the purpose of developing virtue, that's the key.
That's the key.
It's a primary decree. And because of that initial fundamental decision, it makes possible a profoundly undesirable outcome.
Precisely. The outcome is not what she wanted in the moment. When she walks in later and finds the room in total chaos, toys everywhere, ink spilled, books ruined, that mess is undeniably against her specific preference.
She hates the mess.
She actively dislikes the mess. She actively dislikes the disobedience.
But the crucial point Lewis makes is that her prior will, the decision to grant freedom for the sake of true character, is what left the children free to be untidy.
Yes.
The untidiness itself is against her preference, yet the condition that allowed it was freely chosen by her for a better, more meaningful outcome: the formation of self-governing people.
And we apply this directly to the universe and to God's sovereignty. God's overarching structural will is to create a live world populated by creatures with genuine freedom and autonomy, capable of choosing him.
That's the big picture.
That decision, that decree to permit agency, necessarily leaves creatures free to be untidy, free to rebel, free to inflict harm. The sin and evil we observe is the immediate, specific outcome that is absolutely against his moral preference for goodness and obedience.
So the evil that exists is contrary to God's moral will, but its possibility is consistent with his decreed will to create free beings. It means God is not malevolent. He hates the mess. But he is not thwarted because the existence of the mess is a permitted, though undesirable, consequence of his own decree to grant freedom.
It resolves the logical knot Lewis first presented. It shows how a thing can be in accord with God's will in one way, the permission of the structural design, the desire for genuine relationship, but not in another, the specific action of rebellion or sin.
Right.
It allows us to hold on to both his goodness and his absolute authority simultaneously. He thought the price of a potential war in the universe was worth paying for the sake of a live world where true, voluntary love was possible.
And if we pause there and consider the Reformed tradition, this notion of a permissive will is deeply significant. It guards against two errors, making God the author of evil and limiting God's ultimate control. Lewis achieves this balance by showing that the creation of freedom itself is an expression of God's absolute control, even though that freedom is used to rebel against his moral preferences. It's a key distinction for understanding Lewis's entire theological outlook.
It is. Lewis doesn't just dismiss the paradox. He dissects it using practical reasoning. He takes the seemingly vast gulf between divine action and human suffering and bridges it with the simple, relatable experience of a parent or any governing authority struggling to balance control with the necessity of autonomy for growth.
This clarity on the divine dilemma immediately pivots us to the source of evil itself, free will.
Yeah.
If the possibility of evil is the necessary price of freedom, then we must ask why God created freedom in the first place, knowing the potential catastrophe. Lewis states plainly that God created creatures with free will, meaning they could go either wrong or right.
And he immediately challenges anyone who claims to imagine a creature that is simultaneously free and incapable of error.
Right.
We often wish for that fictional being, a creature that chooses good every single time but still retains the essence of choice. Lewis says that's a logical impossibility, a contradiction in terms.
You can't have it both ways.
You can't. If something is truly free to be good, it must logically also possess the option to be bad.
That makes free will less of a gift and more of a terrible necessary responsibility. Lewis argues that free will, though it made evil possible, is the only thing that makes possible any goodness, love, or joy that is actually worth having.
Yes.
This gets to the essence of why God created us in the first place. What exactly would the alternative creation look like?
It would be a world of automata. That's the technical term Lewis uses. Creatures that work automatically, entirely programmed, like a clockwork doll or a computer running a script.
Just robots.
Just robots. If we were merely automata, we would move and speak only when God pulls the strings, fulfilling his will mechanically. That world, he suggests, would hardly be worth the effort of creation, because there would be no relationship, no voluntary return of love.
And he contrasts that empty possibility with the kind of relationship God actually desires. The happiness God designs for his higher creatures is something altogether more intense, dynamic, and relational than mere functional obedience.
He describes it in almost shocking terms. He calls it the ecstasy of being freely, voluntarily united to him and to each other in love and delight.
Ecstasy. That's a strong word.
It is. This isn't just moral satisfaction. This is joy at a cosmic level. Lewis goes so far as to claim that this spiritual union is so intense that even the most rapturous love or sense of delight we know on earth is comparatively thin, like milk and water.
Wow.
For this kind of freely given love, this ecstatic union, genuine freedom and therefore genuine risk is the absolute prerequisite.
That provides the justification for the initial divine risk. God knew the consequence if freedom were used wrongly, but Lewis asserts that God thought the possibility of ecstatic, voluntary love was worth the risk.
And this is the moment where Lewis anticipates the common human inclination. The listener who looks at global suffering, who looks at the war, famine, and cruelty and says, Lewis is wrong. God made a terrible calculation. It wasn't worth the risk.
And for those who feel compelled to make that judgment, Lewis provides his fascinating rhetorical check the stream and the source argument. It prevents us from taking a false high ground against the Creator.
He reminds us that any power we possess, including the power to reason, the power to judge, the power to critique a divine decision, is ultimately derived from God. God is the source from which all our reasoning power flows.
Therefore, arguing against God's logic is a fundamentally flawed intellectual exercise. It's like arguing that the stream can rise higher than its own source.
Mm.
Your ability to think, to judge, to declare this suffering is too high a price is a faculty gifted to you by the very being you are judging.
Lewis's point is structural. If the source of all reason, God himself, determined that the potential for voluntary ecstatic love justified the state of war and suffering inherent in free will, then our downstream derivative reason is logically obliged to accept that it is worth paying.
Okay.
It shifts the entire conversation away from emotional complaint, which is understandable, to a necessary structural critique of one's own intellectual authority. You cannot rationally stand outside the system and criticize one who authored the system itself.
Having established the necessity and the high stakes of freedom, Lewis addresses another very common question aimed at explaining the failure of creation. Why did God make a creature of such rotten stuff that it went wrong so quickly?
Right.
This is the idea that the ingredients for creation were somehow flawed from the start.
Lewis dismisses this entirely, not by defending the materials, but by inverting the principle itself.
Inverting it, how?
He says the failure is a function of greatness, not inherent weakness.
What's the inverted principle?
It is this. The quality of the creature determines the magnitude of the fall. If a creature is made of better stuff, if it is cleverer, stronger, more self-aware, and freer, the better it will be if it succeeds. But consequently, the worse and the more destructive it will be if it fails.
So the potential for good and the potential for evil scale up together.
They scale up together. This explains why the fall of an archangel, the being Lewis calls the dark power, was such a cosmic catastrophe. That being was made of the most magnificent stuff available.
Right, he gives some examples.
He does. He paints a spectrum to make this clear. Consider a cow. Its moral potential is extremely limited. It can't be very good, and it can't be very bad. Its consequences are contained.
Okay.
A dog has greater potential for loyalty and relationship, and thus greater capacity for bad behavior.
Sure.
A human child still more so. An ordinary adult man has a terrifying scope for good or evil. A man of genius, still wider. And finally, a superhuman spirit like Satan is capable of being the best, the most glorious creation, or, when twisted, the worst, most devastating force of all.
So the materials weren't rotten at all. They were precious, powerful, and glorious. That quality is precisely what made the subsequent failures so spectacularly destructive and far-reaching.
The fall of a great being results in great ruin.
Yeah.
Which brings us naturally to the specific nature of the original sin, the thing that broke creation. Lewis offers a traditional, logical guess grounded in human experience for how the dark power went wrong and then taught us to go wrong.
The sin is centered entirely on the concept of self. Once you have genuine freedom, you have the possibility of putting self first. Lewis defines this as the desire to be the center, effectively wanting to be God in your own private sphere.
That's it. That original structural rebellion is pride.
Right.
Pride is the specific refusal to admit one's status as a created being. It's the rejection of the distinction between creator and creature.
Yeah.
Lewis is quite careful to clarify a common mistake here regarding the fall of man, which many people, especially in modern discussions, attribute primarily to sexual lust or desire.
He argues that's a misreading of the sequence.
Yeah.
The Genesis story suggests that corruption in our sexual nature followed the fall. It was a result of the deeper disease, not the original cause.
Exactly. The original sin was not about disordered appetite, but disordered will. The initial deception, Satan's great offer to Eve, was the pitch that humans could be like gods.
No doubt, it's the lie.
It was the idea of setting up shop on their own, becoming their own absolute masters, and inventing a private sort of happiness that was wholly apart from God, governed by their own rules. That impulse towards self-sufficiency and self-idolatry, that is the cancer Lewis identifies at the core of the human problem.
And it's this self-idolatry that Lewis will now use to interpret the entirety of human history.
That decision, the self-centered impulse to invent happiness outside of God, is the engine driving nearly all of human history, according to Lewis.
Okay.
He views the long, terrible story of civilization, the desperate pursuit of money, ambition, political struggle, war, empires, and class conflict, as simply man's persistent yet hopeless attempt to find something other than God that will deliver lasting peace and contentment.
This leads us directly to one of Lewis's most memorable and powerful illustrations, the engine analogy.
It's a great one.
It's the key to understanding why this constant expenditure of human energy, the building of civilizations, the writing of great literature, the pursuit of scientific knowledge is inevitably doomed to failure when divorced from its creator.
The analogy is simple and mechanical. Lewis suggests that God invented us as a mechanic invents an engine. An engine is designed for a specific fuel. A car designed to run on high-octane gasoline won't function properly on anything else, no matter how much you try to coerce it. Lewis says God designed the human machine to run on himself.
He is the fuel our spirits were designed to burn, the food our spiritual nature was designed to consume. There is literally no other suitable fuel source available in the entire universe.
This instantly reframes the common secular request put to God. People often say, if God is good, why can't he just make us happy in our own way, without all this religion and dogma?
Sure, you hear that all the time.
Lewis argues that God cannot grant us happiness and peace apart from himself, because that happiness, that state of sustainable peace, literally does not exist.
Yeah.
It's an impossible, structurally flawed request.
It's like demanding that the engine run smoothly on orange juice or mud.
Exactly.
You can pour it in, but the machine will immediately object and eventually seize up.
And this analogy gives us the ultimate key to interpreting history. We look at the terrific energy humanity has spent. We see magnificent civilizations built, legal structures created, scientific leaps achieved, and excellent institutions devised. But something always, inevitably goes wrong.
Always.
There is a fatal flaw in the human machine that consistently allows selfish, cruel, and corrupt people to rise to the top, and everything slides back into misery and ruin.
It's the constant breakdown. The machine starts, runs a few spectacular steps, look at Rome, look at the great European empires, look at the rise and fall of utopian political movements, and then it conks.
It cons.
It breaks down because the operators, humans, are trying to run it on the wrong juice. They are attempting to achieve divine satisfaction using human means. Power, money, sex, fame, ideology.
And that, Lewis concludes, is the work of Satan, redirecting the human fuel source away from God and toward creation itself. This leads naturally to the question of what God does in response to this catastrophic historical breakdown.
Right. If the machine is conking out in every generation, did God simply abandon it?
Lewis says no, and he outlines God's response in 3 distinct preparatory steps instituted before the real shock of Christ's arrival.
Okay.
These were steps of rescue designed to prevent the complete spiritual destruction of humanity and pave the way for a true fix.
So what's the first one?
The first preparation was the conscience. Despite the corruption of the machine, God left us with a sense of right and wrong, the moral law. This shows us what the machine should be doing. Lewis acknowledges that all through history there have been people trying to obey it. Philosophers, moralists, good citizens, sometimes very hard, but none of them ever quite succeeded perfectly. The law was written on the heart, but our ability to follow it was impaired by the wrong fuel.
So it sets the standard, but simultaneously proves our incapacity to meet it.
Exactly. It acts as a permanent internal witness to our failed self-sufficiency. The second preparation involves what Lewis calls good dreams.
Good dreams. This is a fascinating sociological and mythological point.
It really is. Lewis speaks of queer stories scattered throughout what he calls heathen religions worldwide. These stories share a common thread. A divine being or a god who dies and comes back to life, often giving new life or sustenance through his death or sacrifice.
So these weren't direct revelation, but universal mythological echoes, a kind of spiritual intuition.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It suggests a pre-existing global recognition of the need for sacrifice, a mediator, and resurrection. This dispersed knowledge prepared the human mind for the actual event, making the arrival of Christ's story recognizable on some deep subconscious level, even if the details were confused.
And the third preparation?
The third was highly specific and disciplinary, the selection and training of the Jewish people. This was a direct, intense intervention. Lewis says God spent several centuries hammering into their heads 2 specific non-negotiable ideas.
First, that there was only one God.
Right? Establishing pure monotheism against the pervasive polytheism of the world. And second, that this one God was intensely concerned with right conduct, justice, and mercy, not merely ritual sacrifice, but a moral standard. The Old Testament is essentially the account of that very intense hammering process, the cycle of obedience, rebellion, judgment, and restoration, all designed to set the stage for the final, ultimate intervention.
So this long process ensures that when the final act occurs, there's at least one people on Earth who understand the identity of God who is acting.
The transcendent moral sovereign of the universe, yes.
And that sets the context perfectly for the arrival of the man who would shake the entire structure of human thought.
After centuries of preparation, hammering, and prophecies among these specially trained Jews, there suddenly turns up a man who goes about talking as if he was God.
Yeah.
This is the historical climax, and Lewis makes sure to strip away the familiarity that centuries of Christian culture has layered over these events.
He highlights the magnitude of the claim by pointing out three specific areas where this man's words are not just extraordinary, but uniquely divine.
Yeah.
He claims the authority to forgive sins. He states he has always existed, using language that implies eternity, and he claims he will return to judge the world at the end of time. These aren't the claims of a prophet or a philosopher.
No.
They are cosmic, absolute claims belonging only to the Creator.
And Lewis is astute in drawing attention to the cultural context. The claim is uniquely shocking because it is made by a Jew, operating within the framework of Jewish monotheism. Lewis contrasts this with other spiritual traditions.
If this man were, say, a pantheist, perhaps from certain Eastern traditions, claiming to be part of God or recognizing the divine spark within himself, that might be unremarkable.
Right, in that tradition, the universe itself is God, and union with the divine is the goal of enlightenment. Many spiritual teachers have claimed that.
But Christ spoke within the Jewish language, where God, Yahweh, meant the being outside the world.
The absolutely transcendent creator who made everything and was infinitely fundamentally different from anything else created. The chasm between creator and creature was infinite.
Therefore, for a man standing in first-century Judea who ate, slept, and breathed like other men, to say the things Jesus said, to assert equality with the transcendent being, was, as Lewis puts it, quite simply the most shocking thing that has ever been uttered by human lips. It was not just high spiritual talk. It was a unique claim of identity that breached the ultimate boundary between man and God.
And the most accessible example of this boundary breach, the one that Lewis uses to really drive home the logical consequence, is the claim to forgive sins.
Any
sins committed against anyone. This specific claim often slips past us because we're so used to hearing it in religious settings. Lewis forces us to ask what this claim means if the speaker is not God.
Right.
He argues that in that case, the claim is preposterous, maybe even comic.
We understand forgiveness of offenses against ourselves. If you steal my bicycle, I have the right to pardon you. The injury is mine, and the authority to remit the penalty is mine.
Of course. But the absurdity arises when we imagine a man, a bystander, who is unrobbed and untrodden on, who announces to a thief that he forgives him for stealing other men's money.
Or for punching other men's faces?
Right. Lewis describes his conduct as asinine fatuity, a ridiculous, brainless conceit, a man inserting himself into an offense where he was not the injured party.
Yet this is exactly what the man Jesus did unhesitatingly.
All the time.
He told people their sins were forgiven and never once waited to consult all the other people whom their sins had injured, or even consulted the governing authority whose laws were broken.
He behaved as if he was the party chiefly concerned, the person chiefly offended in all offenses, regardless of who the immediate human victim was.
So whether a sin was a casual lie, a theft, or an act of cruelty.
He spoke as if the primary violation was always against him.
The implication is massive. This behavior only makes coherent sense if he really was the ultimate transcendent God whose law is broken and whose love is wounded in every single sin committed.
That's the only way it works. In the mouth of anyone else, any sage, prophet, or moral teacher, these words would imply a silliness and conceit unrivaled.
But here's the profound paradox. Despite these claims that would make any sane person immediately dismiss him as a megalomaniac, neither his enemies, nor neutral historical readers, nor those who love him, get the impression of silliness or conceit from reading the Gospels.
No, you don't.
Lewis notes that Christ describes himself as humble and meek, and we generally accept that description. We fail to notice the logical crisis this creates.
Right.
If he were only a man, humility and meekness would be the absolute last characteristics we could attribute to someone who went around announcing that he had existed eternally and would judge all mankind.
The only explanation for the paradox is that the claims are true. If they are true, they are humble statements of fact. If they are false, they are the most arrogant statements ever conceived.
This is the setup for the famous Lewis trilemma, designed to close the door on the patronizing position of neutrality. Lewis targets the really foolish thing people often say, I'm ready to accept Jesus as a great moral teacher, but I don't accept his claim to be God.
You hear it all the time.
Lewis argues forcefully that Christ has not left that option open to us. He did not build a bridge to that middle ground.
He burns that bridge.
He does. A man who is merely a human teacher, saying the things Jesus said, claiming to forgive sins, claiming to be the divine ultimate authority, would not be a great moral teacher at all.
His claims invalidate his moral standing if they are lies. If the claims were false, he would necessarily fall into one of the other two categories.
Lunatic.
He would either be a lunatic on the level of a clinically insane person who seriously believes he is, say, a supernatural being, or a piece of breakfast food. His ethical advice would be irrelevant, delivered by a delusional mind. We would shut him up for his own safety.
Or something worse.
Or, Lewis argues, he would be something worse. The devil of hell, a deceptive entity using profound moral goodness as a cloak to spread the ultimate falsehood, a claim to divinity. He would be the master deceiver demanding worship under false pretenses.
Lewis is relentless here. He is forcing the listener, the observer, to abandon the sanitized view of Jesus they often hold. The decision is inescapable.
You have to choose.
You, the listener, must make a choice about who this person was, based purely on the content of his own claims and behavior.
And Lewis leaves us with three stark alternatives. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or a madman, or something worse, a demon.
And we are not allowed the comfortable option of accepting the ethics while rejecting the identity.
That option's off the table.
He forces us off the fence. We must either shut him up for a fool, spit at him and kill him as a demon, or fall at his feet and call him Lord and God. That's the full, unvarnished logical force of the Lewisian trilemma.
It's the ultimate summation of his approach, using rigorous, simple logic to show that the Christian claim is either true and magnificent or false and insane. It cannot, by the very nature of the claims made, be a gentle moral philosophy.
We have completed the deep dive into Lewis's illogical steps, and it is a breathtaking progression. We began with the paradox of evil, seeing how the doctrine of structural free will, not rotten creation, was the absolute necessity for achieving a glorious ecstatic relationship. We then moved through the absolute seriousness of sin as self-idolatry, putting self first and trying to run on the wrong fuel.
And we culminated in the inescapable, shocking claims of Christ. Lewis's structure forces the listener to grapple with the actual unsanitized content of the New Testament, the claim of a single historical person who consistently behaved as the party chiefly offended in every transgression committed since the world began.
It strips away all the easy ways out.
It strips away all the easy, comfortable ways out of the dilemma.
And as we close, we leave you with one final provocative thought, building directly on Lewis's engine analogy. If Lewis is correct that we are machines designed by God, built specifically to run on God himself as the only suitable fuel, what are the specific, concrete symptoms you notice in your own life when you realize you are running on the wrong juice? And what, then, is the next specific step you take toward finding and connecting to the true source of fuel that your spirit was designed to consume? Think about that until next time.